Blessed.
I want to start with Pim.
Blessed.
Come up here. Come
Yes.
share
Can you
my-
tell us the story?
Yes.
I went to the eye doctors and they do this field of vision test. And it's kind of like if you've had a hearing test, most of you have had that, you know, where they make the noise and you have to say, yeah, yeah. It's kind of that this thing keeps blinking and you have to say, yeah, I see it, yeah, I don't. And so I'm all done and the girl who was doing it, all of a sudden she said to me, you're not supposed to be seeing all the lights. And I said, well, I did. And I said, by the way, did you know that Moses was 125 years old when he died and his vision was strong and so was his muscles. And God said that, and I said, a friend of mine gave that to me and I've claimed it for my own. And she said, does that stuff really work?
Yeah.
So, you know, like, I'm starting to believe, like, why did God send me here? Like, at that moment, I knew that I was not going to ever be blind. And so I go in to see the doctor, and he comes in, and he looks at my eyes, and he puts up, and this other lady comes in, and he says, we have to do something. This other lady comes in, and I said, look, no drops. I had this terrible reaction. She said, no, we're just going to numb your eyes. So they numb my eyes and let go of my eyes. And he said, what happened to all the stuff that was in your eyes?
I got supposed to scooped it out.
I said, you know, I asked God not to let me be blind. And he said, well, the stuff still wouldn't go away. He was so frustrated. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but God's wonderful. And my eyes and the rest of me are awesomely made by God. And he just looked at me like, and you're a lunatic. But that was okay. I just really felt like everything I said was okay.
It was.
And
God is great.
yeah, everyone was outside. And so I said to the doctor, so I'm supposed to be going back it's not quite a month that you have to do these treatments. And I said, well, when I'm coming back, he said, I guess 6 months so I can look at your eyes again.
Yeah.
So you went from you're going to be blind
Crazy.
to,
Oh, he did say, but you have lost, in the peripheral of this eye, I have dead spots. And I said, yeah, I know that. And he said, you know that? And I said, yeah. And when I was in the military, I was overexposed to some gas, and it got in my eyes, and I've always had that. And he said, and that's the only thing wrong with your eyes? And I said, well, do I have glaucoma? He said, no, but when I sent the test in, I was sure you did. So, you know, it was awesome, and I got in a car, and I called Jay, and I called my daughter, and it was just awesome, you know. So thank you all for praying.
Dear God.
Thank you for the words that some of you said to me. Thank you for the weird things that some of you said to me. But in case you keep stuff, they're confused back there. Some people have said some weird things to me through this, you know. You know when somebody dies and you don't know what to say? So you just say stuff. And people say stuff. You know, and if you have ever had a friend, I realized when people said stuff, they were trying to say the right thing, and I loved it, which was a lesson for me, including my husband, because he says stuff. Yeah, and I love you so much. And I got to go, I kept having this vision of my husband dressing me, and what I was going to look like. He's colorblind. Yeah, he's colorblind.
love you, Ed.
All blue, all green, all...
Well, I have to tell you this, when we first got married, and he was colorblind, you know, I found out he was colorblind, and he came home one day, and burgundy was in. He had on an orange shirt and burgundy pants. And I said, I'm going to write the colors, and I'm going to tell you what goes together, right? So on his ties and his pants, I wrote what color they are in the band or something. And he comes in with me with a tie, and he goes, you know, I'm colorblind, I'm not stupid. And I said, honey, what do you mean? I wrote brown tie. He said, I already knew it was a tie before I married you.
I dress that way, I'm like,
Well, you know, since then it's become almost acceptable you can wear anything, but then, you know. And of course, then when I was a bride, I used to think I was responsible for him, but now I'm not a long journey, but that morning when I went in there, I had such peace. Really and truly.
That's awesome. That's our God, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't that great? How many of you have ever seen this stuff in a tube called capsaicin?
What?
Capsaicin? It's a cream you put on.
Yeah.
I've got some of that on my leg right now, and I'm on fire. So if I run out of here, you
It's not the Holy Spirit.
The first time we got that, I put it on, I thought thicker was better.
Oh my gosh, yes, I saw it.
I thought I was going to have blisters on my body. It was terrible. But this
I won't
is,
tell
this is
you that
getting
my
there.
son thought it would be okay to use for itch. Dry itch.
Oh, man.
And he was running around the house screaming, and my daughter-in-law was just laughing.
Well, I put it, my leg was really blowing today, so I just put just a little on there, but boy, it's warming up. I don't know if it's just because I'm walking around or what, but it's hot. That stuff works, I'll tell you. I think when I get home, I'm tossing it in the garbage. So anyway,
Give it 2 tries.
that's right, it's time to give it up. I can't imagine a little kid getting into that stuff. Well, anyway, we're finished doing Genesis today. Next week is going to be our last lesson in Genesis. This will be 30 lessons we've done. It's a big, big book. And we may do a kind of a recap after that, just a one lesson kind of talking about the whole thing in full. But anyway, last week we talked about Jacob's brothers and how they'd gone to Egypt to get food. There was a famine going on in Canaan and Egypt. And they were sent to Egypt because they heard they could buy food there. So they went in and they met Joseph, but they didn't know Joseph was their brother. Joseph knew it was them. They didn't know that he was Joseph. And probably the reason they didn't know is, first of all, his name had been changed. Anybody remember what his name was? If you do, I'll give you the golden star. It was Zaphaneth Paneah. So he probably wasn't referred to as Joseph. He was referred to as Zaphaneth Paneah. He had assimilated into the Egyptian culture. He probably didn't have a beard and long hair like his brothers had. He was using interpreters to talk to them. He wasn't speaking the native language. So they had no idea this was his brother. And he was kind of just playing a dirty trick on them the whole time, which is pretty nice compared to what they had done to him, you know. But they just didn't realize it was him, and he did. And what's really neat about Joseph is how he didn't repay evil for evil. I think we can learn something from that as Christians, to not repay evil for evil. And boy, I mean, was it evil what they did to him? First they were going to kill him, and then they decided, well, we'll throw him in the cistern and let him die in there. And then they saw these guys coming along, and they sold him to them, and then they sold him into slavery. So, and if it probably wasn't for Judah, they probably would have killed him. Judah kind of talked him out of that, even though he didn't expect him to be sold. That he wasn't there when they did it. But anyway, the brothers had gone in, they had bought grain and all that, and as they were going home, they checked their bags the first night they stopped, and they found their silver was in their bags. And they're thinking, man, what is going on here? And you didn't mess with the Egyptians. They were the world power at the time. And here they find their silver in there that they had paid for this, but yet they have all their grain. So they went on back to their father, and the father said, Jacob said, something's going on here. Well, they ate all that grain eventually, and they needed more. So, they probably had a big tribe by that time. They had not only Jacob and his wives and his concubines, all that, and they had all his children, they had all their grandchildren. So there was this big tribe, and they had servants and all that. So all that grain was gone, and he had to send them back. Well, Joseph had told them, said, when you come next time, you bring this young man Benjamin with you. Well, you remember how Joseph was kind of spoiled, and he was Jacob's favorite and all that. It just almost killed Jacob when he found out that he thought that Joseph had been killed. It just zapped him. I think from that moment, and the rest of his life, he was depressed until he found out Joseph was alive. Well, Benjamin was actually through the same mother as Joseph, through Rachel. So Joseph really wanted to meet this kid. And so he said, you bring him back if you come back, and I'm keeping Simeon with me just so you guys will come back. Well, when they went back and told Jacob that they kept Simeon in Egypt, and that they had to take Benjamin, man, Jacob just almost couldn't hear it. And he said, I just can't do it, I can't do it. Well, finally, they ran out of enough food, they had to have food, and so he said, okay, go ahead and take it. It was either that or die. And so the brothers take, and they go back, and that's where we started today. Now, can you imagine how heartbroken Jacob must have been when he saw Benjamin leave? brothers. I mean, here he's thinking, this kid may never come back, and I've already lost one, you know, and here Simeon's in prison waiting, so you can't win. Well, you know, Jacob didn't trust the Lord, did he? You know, you go all the way back to his grandfather, Abraham. God had told Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make a big, big nation out of you. And he told that to his father, Isaac. And yet he told it to him, and instead of trusting that, he just trusted what he saw with his eyes, didn't he, and what he felt. Isn't that kind of how we do a lot of times? We just kind of expect the worst, and we don't believe God that's going to get us through. God gives us all these great promises in the Bible, but we tend to look at what we see instead of what God's Word says. We can learn something from this. That's kind of the way we are. But the Bible says, in John 10:10 says, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but what does God do? He gives us life, and he gives it more abundantly. You know, a lot of us have life, but what about the abundant life? That's what God wants us to have, the abundant life. So, open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 42, and let's start there. The brothers had ended up in front of Joseph, and they began to argue among themselves in front of Joseph. They didn't realize he could understand their language. They thought, have you ever been around people with another language and they get to talking and they think you don't understand? Well, you know, I don't speak a lot of Spanish, but I understand some. And sometimes I can pick up a few things, but they didn't think he understood. So here they're arguing between one another. Genesis chapter 42, verse 21, it says, they said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us. You know, that shows that Joseph, I mean, when they were getting ready to kill him or throw him into the cistern, he was begging them. And who wouldn't? You know, don't do that to me. He's a young man. And they realized that what they had done was wrong, and they feel like now God's punishing us for that. That's why we're going through all this stuff. We don't understand what's happening, but we shouldn't have done this. And then verse 22, Reuben replies, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. And see, you know, I did this. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. See, they just thought he didn't speak the language. But you see what sin does to us? Sin causes us to argue. It causes us to fight. It does all these things to us. And it's a whole lot easier if we decide to walk this life not walking in sin. Did you know we can do that? We can live this life and not walk in sin if we walk in the Spirit daily. And God gives us that ability to do that. You know, we don't have to sin. It's kind of like if someone lies. Have you ever known somebody that was just kind of a liar? They tell one lie, and guess what? Then they got to tell another lie to cover that lie. Well, then they tell another lie to cover the second lie, and it just goes on and on and on. And they finally forget the lies they told. We had a guy in the refinery I worked with up in Salt Lake City. He was a really nice guy, but we called him Moose. And I'd have to think real hard to think what his real name was. But anyway, he just don't even do him as Moose. But he was telling me when I first hired on up there, I transferred from Texas City, Texas to Salt Lake City. And already knew kind of the process of this unit and all this stuff, but everything's a little different. So I was learning this unit. He was training me. And he was telling me, he said, I'm training to be a registered nurse. Oh, that's great, you know. And he was telling me all about this stuff. Well, about 9 years later, he was training another guy, and I heard him tell this guy, I said, yeah, I'm training to be a registered nurse. 9 years later. And he'd never gone to college a day in his life, you know. So, and I guess his one story was he used to have a helicopter that he flew, and he'd land in the parking lot and come to work. He'd get his helicopter and fly home, and he never had a helicopter. So he was one of those guys that kind of believed his own stuff. And he would tell us stuff, and he believed it himself, you know. And really nice guy, but I never quite understood how he kept all that stuff straight. So, anyway, I don't understand. It's just a whole lot easier just to not walk in sin, isn't it? And to not lie and those kind of things. Amen. So anyway, the brothers, they go back to Egypt. They bring Benjamin back with them. And chapter 43, turn over there to verse 19. Here they had all this silver. They didn't know how that had happened. And when Jacob sent them back, he gave double the silver to them so they could pay for the first bunch of food they got, and then they could pay for the next. Genesis 43, verse 19, and it says, so they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance to the house. We beg your pardon, our Lord. See how they really spoke humbly because they were starving? It says, we beg your pardon, our Lord, they said. We came down here the first time to buy food. But at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack. So we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks. It's all right, he said. Don't be afraid. Listen to what he says. He says, your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I like that. I received your silver. Then he brought Simeon out to them. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon, because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, how is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living? See, Joseph really wanted to know how Jacob was doing. And of course, Jacob had no idea Joseph was alive. Verse 28, he says, they replied, your servant, our father, is still alive and well. And they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. Can you imagine Joseph? I mean, he has to run out so they don't see him cry. He doesn't want them to see that. He runs into his room and he just cries. And in verse 31, it says, after he had washed his face so they couldn't tell he'd been crying, he came back out and, controlling himself, said, serve the food. They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves. They were all in the same room, but they couldn't serve them together. There was just an abomination for an Egyptian to eat with a Hebrew. They considered them so much further beneath them. And it says, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest. And they looked at each other in astonishment. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. Can you imagine this young boy? He's just got all this food piled right there. And so Joseph was taking good care of him. Well, Joseph decided to have some more fun with them, didn't he? I mean, here he's kind of a practical joker in a mean way. Of course, like I say, he wasn't nearly as mean as they were to him. But he told his servants to go ahead and fill their sacks again with grain. Fill them up. But he said, go ahead and take their silver again, put it in there again. And then he had what they called a divining cup. And all these Egyptians had what they called divining cups. They were silver cups. And they say they would fill those with water, and they would take melted wax, and they would throw it in the water, and then they would take the wax out and look at it and try to divine the future with that. You know, they were way into witchcraft and into magic, the Egyptians. You remember when Moses was before Pharaoh, and there were the 2 Egyptian magicians, Jans and Jambres? That was a big deal then. So they would take this wax, they would look at it and try to read the future. Well, Joseph had one too. So he tells them, said, put that cup in Benjamin's sack. Don't let them know, put it in there. Well, as they took off, he waited just a little while for him to get a little bit out of town, and then he sent his servant and said, go catch them, and let's play this trick on them. So he catches them, and he said first, why would you repay good with evil, is what he told them. And Judah says, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. He says, you took his divining cup. And he says, no, we didn't take it. And he said, if one of my brothers took it, kill him, and the rest of us will be your slaves. Well, what did the servant do? He starts with the oldest, because he knew it was in the youngest sack, right? He begins digging through there. Well, he finds the silver again and stuff. Well, as he gets to Benjamin's sack, he finds the cup. And they said, okay, we got to take you back. And he said, we'll just take Benjamin. And they go back before Joseph, and Joseph said, the rest of you can go, but I'm taking Benjamin with me. And Judah said, look, my dad will die. Said, really, he'll die if you do this. Please don't take him. Take me, take my brothers, don't take Benjamin. And he was really upset about this. And you know, could you imagine if they would have taken Benjamin, what would have happened to Jacob? I think from the time that he thought he had lost Joseph, I think the rest of his life he lived in depression. We'll see later, as he finds out Joseph's alive, it says his life was revived. So I think he spent years in depression. So finally, let's see what happens. Let me find where I'm at here. Well, Joseph told him too, he said, didn't you think I could figure out who did this through divining? You know, apparently, I don't know if Joseph really got into this divining stuff or not. He had assimilated into the Egyptian culture, so he may have gotten into some of that witchcraft. We find out God's people did some of those things that they should have done back then. But he was giving them a hard time. He said, didn't you think I could figure out who did it just by this magic? Well, anyway, after he plays the trick on a while, go to Genesis chapter 45, and let's see what happened. It says, then Joseph could, and I'm reading out the New Living Translation. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants. And he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Can you imagine what they're thinking? Here they had sold him into slavery, and they're thinking, man, he is going to kill us. We are going to have our heads chopped off. They're thinking, oh, they're probably torture us for 30 days. I mean, don't tell them what they're thinking. In verse 4, he says, then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. You know, God was not going to let that family die out, no matter what. God had already promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their family would go on, that there would be a great nation made from them. No matter what happened, God wasn't going to allow them to die out. So, God didn't cause the brothers to sell him into slavery, but God turned that to good. You see, the Bible says those things that are meant for evil, God turns to good in our lives, and we can trust that with the Lord. Verse 9 says, now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. Goshen was the best part of Egypt. It's in the delta, they call it. If you know anything about deltas, they have rich soil. It's where like rivers wash out into the ocean. And they have really rich soil. It's great for raising crops. It's great for raising animals, for ranching and shepherding. And that's where he said you're going to live. The very best of Egypt is where you'll live. And verse 11 says, I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You know, you need to realize that even in bad times, God will provide for us, won't he? You know, the economy can go south, but God still provides for us. And we can make sure that. I mean, we just follow the Word. You know, God makes provision for us, and one of the ways he does that is through our tithe and through our offerings. When we give, God gives back to us. You know, if you haven't found that out, if you haven't experienced the tithe yet and really gotten into that, let me encourage you, learn to tithe. Learn to tithe, and God will always provide for you. I promise you that. It's amazing the stories I've heard, the stories of my life and other people's lives when they learn to tithe, how God takes care of their needs. It's amazing. That's just a spiritual principle God has. Verse 12 says, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it really is I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. Isn't that awesome? Here's people that were just, they hated Hebrews. I mean, they looked down on them, yet he's saying, come and live in my country and eat off the fat of the land. I'll give you the very best we have. So he sends these wagons, these carts for them to go, and he sends food, he sends everything else with them so they can be provided for them their trip back. You know, God gave Joseph favor, didn't he? You know, one thing I found out when I went to seminary, they had 2 weeks of school. The first 2 weeks were orientation. Well, I had looked and looked and looked and looked for a job. And I mean, I finally spent every penny I'd saved to go to school. And I mean, I was working day labor jobs, just trying to put food on the table. And school was coming up, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to get able to go to school. Well, about 2 or 3 weeks before school started, my aunt called me, and she said, you know, your uncle and I have been praying, and God wants us to pay for your school. I'm like, praise God, you know, God took care of that. But I still didn't have a job. Well, one day I thought, man, I'll haul garbage. I don't care what I got to do. So I went to City Hall, and I mean, I tried everywhere. Went to City Hall, and I said, you guys taking any applications? I don't care if it's hauling garbage or what. And this lady says, well, they're going to hire jailers, and they're going to have a test at 2 o'clock. This is like noon. So I said, well, give me an application. Well, she gives me a stack of papers like that, literally. And so I just sat down right there and started filling them out. Well, anyway, I went into this thing they were going to do, this test and all this stuff. And there was people in there wearing, you know, old sloppy T-shirts and shorts. You know, at least I had a nice pair of jeans and a nice shirt on. You know, I mean, some people don't care. You know. Anyway, I went in there, and then they took us and showed us the jail and all that. Well, they got talking about they were going to start a photo lab so they could start developing all their photos and stuff. Well, I had just left a photography studio that I own, and I developed all my film, and I worked for a sheriff's department, did all the shooting for them anytime someone got killed, and developed all the film, so it worked out perfect. Well, they started all these background investigations, which took about 3 months. And they were calling my old high school teachers. Matter of fact, one day the sergeant was doing all the background stuff. He came in and said, hey, Worley Smith said to tell you hello. That was one of my high school teachers. I said, how did you talk to him? I mean, I'm 400 miles from home. And he said, oh, we had to call some of your teachers and do a background check. They were talking to my neighbors, everything else. Well, I finally got through all that. And when I did, we had to go through a jail certification school. And that was 2 weeks. Well, it just so happened that the second week of the jail school overlapped the first week of school at seminary. Well, I went to the dean and I said, you know what, I've been looking for a job for 3 months. Can I miss that first week of school? And he said, you came here to go to school, not to work in a jail. And he said, you can't miss it. I'm thinking, oh man. He said, you claim Psalms 5:12 that says God will give you favor. And you need to read it sometime. It says, God will compass you about or surround you with favor like a shield. And so I took that, stood on that. I went in and I talked to my lieutenant who, what happened, a lot of times they'd have people move out to Tulsa to go to this school I went to, but they weren't accepted. They told people, we don't accept less than half the people that apply for school. And they said, don't move out here unless you know you're accepted. Well, they'd have people move out there that would do really weird things, like they had one guy murdered his son because he didn't get accepted. I mean, and so the police kind of think, well, all these people at school are really weird, where they're not, you know. Well, I walked into my lieutenant and I explained what was going on, and I said, is there any way we could move this school ahead 1 week? And he never even looked up. He was writing some things. He says, and the name of the school was Rhema. He says, I won't work with a Rhema student. I said, okay, thanks. I walked out, walked to the chief's office, walked in, talked to him, and I said, you know, I hate to do this after you guys gone to all this trouble. I'm going to have to give you my notice. And he said, what's going on? So I explained to him. He says, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. The next day, my sergeant came up to me and says, we moved that school ahead a week. So God took care of it. God gave me favor. And you know, after, I think 3.5 years I'd been there, I was turning my uniforms in. I was getting ready to go to Colorado, pastor a church. And I was there turning my uniforms in. This lieutenant that had said, I won't work with a Rhema student, he literally came running down the hall. And he said, oh, I'm going to catch you before you left. And he said, I just want you to know you have been a blessing to this department. And he said, from now on, when we hire people, we're going to look at Rhema students first. And God gave me favor. And not only did he give me favor, he gave those that came after me favor. And that's what God did with Joseph. So stand on that sometime. If you ever need favor, in Psalms 5:12, God will surround you with favor. Verse 19, he says, you are also directed to tell them, do this. This is Pharaoh telling the brothers of Joseph. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all of Egypt will be yours. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels, that's about $750, and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father. 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said to them, don't quarrel on the way. I think he knew his brothers, didn't he? Don't quarrel on the way, because they're probably arguing back and forth. Have you ever seen big families? It seems like big families always have more fights, don't they?
More personalities.
That's probably true. That's like, I almost say it. Verse 25, so they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him Joseph is still alive. Now, can you imagine what Jacob thinks? His heart probably did a flip-flop.
Absolutely.
They said Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. I can imagine he wouldn't believe them, you know? And he says, but when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of the father Jacob was revived. See, I think he was depressed all those years. And Israel said, I am convinced, Jacob said, I am convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. Did you know that all God's promises are conditional? Did you know that Jacob could have said, I'm staying right here, I'm not going? What would have happened if he had done that? Probably would have died, probably starved to death, and all of his family. But the promise was to take care of him, right? To provide for him, provide for his family. But what did he have to do? He had to go to Egypt, didn't he? All of God's promises are conditional. Salvation is conditional. We have to believe in our heart and confess with our mouth, right?
Right.
Every promise God has is conditional. There's a condition somewhere. Smith Wigglesworth, have you ever heard of him? He used to say, faith is an act. There's an act that always comes with faith. There's belief, but the difference in belief and faith is faith has some kind of action that goes with it. I always say that faith has a spontaneous corresponding action. You know, if I walk up and I say, I believe this stool will hold me up if I sit down. That's belief. But you know, I could sit here and say that until I finally was so exhausted I fell down. But if I really believe it, I say, I believe that stool will hold me up if I sit down. That's faith, right? So faith always has an action. So Jacob took his family, they went on into Egypt. Look in chapter 40, well, we won't read it, but chapter 46, we see that Jacob loaded all this stuff up, loaded his family, and he acted on what the promise was, and they moved to Egypt. So Joseph packs up his chariot, rides down to Goshen to meet them, and the Bible says they hugged for a long time. Can you imagine that homecoming? Imagine what it was like. I imagine there were tears and everything else going on.
Absolutely.
Joseph is quite a guy, isn't he? I mean, I really like this guy. He didn't repay evil for evil when he had every right to, and we can learn a lot from him. Joseph told his brothers that if Pharaoh asked them what their profession was, he said, be sure and tell him that you guys are shepherds and you're ranchers. And why was that? Well, the reason was there were a group of pharaohs, they call them shepherd pharaohs. This Pharaoh, his name was a Pepi. You know, Pharaoh was just a title, like president or something like that. This guy's name was a Pepi, and he was a shepherd Pharaoh. And that's what he did. He ran cattle, he ran sheep, goats, everything else. And they say that the shepherd pharaohs were really, really hard on the people. And the Bible tells us that the people kind of despised shepherds. They looked at them as the ranchers. They looked at them as the lowest kind of people. And the reason is because these shepherd pharaohs were so mean to the people and so hard on them. That's why they looked down on them. And Egypt was a country that they really, they had technology, you know, as far as it was then, and things like that. They kind of looked down on all that kind of stuff. If you had animals and all that, you're like, oh, you stink and that kind of stuff, you know. But it was because of these shepherd pharaohs. But also when the brothers told this Pharaoh that they were shepherds and ranchers, they gave him something in common with him. And so he really liked those guys. Go to Genesis chapter 47, verse 7. It says, then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Isn't that neat? You think Pharaoh, of course Pharaoh did bless Jacob, but Jacob blessed Pharaoh. It says, how old are you, Pharaoh asked him. Jacob replied, I have traveled this earth for 130 hard years, but my life has been short compared to the lives of my ancestors. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh again before leaving his court. So Jacob assigned the best land of Egypt, the region of Ramesses, to his father and his brothers. And he settled them there just as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided food for his father and his brothers in amounts appropriate to the number of their dependents, including the smallest children. Like I say, they probably had a huge tribe. They probably had a lot of people there. And for this whole famine, they were well provided for. And like I say, that's an example to us that even through the hardest times, God's going to provide for us. We don't have to worry about economic failures and all this kind of stuff. God will always provide for us. Well, the famine became very severe in Egypt and Canaan. And it said all the people in Egypt ended up, they spent all their money on all the grain and stuff. And so Joseph took that money. They were buying the grain from Pharaoh, so they put it in Pharaoh's vaults. And Pharaoh became very wealthy because of that, because he had everybody's money. Well, the next year, guess what? The famine was still bad. It was a 7-year famine. So they came to Joseph and they said, look, we don't have any more money. All we have is our livestock. We have horses, we have cattle, we have sheep, we have goats. Let us trade that. That's all we have. And so Joseph said, okay. So he took all their animals and gave them grain. Well, another year comes by, and they've eaten all that grain. They got to have grain again. So what do they offer? They go in and said, all we have is our land and ourselves. That's it. Said, let us trade our land and let us trade ourselves as slaves for food. So Joseph did. All these people, by their own will, became slaves to Pharaoh, and all their land belonged to Pharaoh. Could you imagine that happened in this country? Could you imagine?
Yeah, it's called eminent domain now.
Yeah, you're right. It's not good. I mean, that's not a good situation. But Joseph worked for Pharaoh. You know, he was doing
Yeah,
his
it's not even
job.
voluntary. Everything's worth, it's not even voluntary.
That's true. Well, so what happened after that? I mean, there's nothing left to give, is there? And by that time, you can't let all your people starve, so it doesn't tell us what happened, but I mean, obviously, the country has to give grain. So it really doesn't tell us what happened. But the Bible tells us that Jacob lived 17 more years after that. I think he was really probably toward the end of his life before he found out that Joseph was alive. And it says he was revived because of that. He lived 17 more years before his death. And then he called Joseph in one day and he said, look, I want you to take a vow. Remember how Abraham had his servant put his hand under his thigh? And he said, I want you to go find a son or a wife for Isaac. You made him take this vow. Well, that's the same thing Jacob did. He said, put your hand under my thigh and make me a vow that when I die, you won't bury me in Egypt. Take me back to Canaan and bury me among my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. So Joseph made that promise, and we're getting through early today, but anyway, he made the promise, I will take you back and bury you there. We see later, we'll see next week that he did that. There was a big party that went with them, all the way back to Canaan. They buried the father, and then they came back. And we'll finish up Genesis next week, see what happened there. And finally, Joseph, it ends with Joseph's death in Egypt. So, any questions about all that? Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, the brothers, you know, there were 12 in all, and they were pretty despicable in their lives, and yet they're the 12 tribes of Israel. God took evil and used it for good. That blows my mind.
Well, we're going to see
The
next
gates of
week.
heaven are the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yep. And Jacob also talks about each of the sons next week. We're going to see that. And boy, some of them were evil. So it's interesting.
It's amazing how the evil.
What do you think we can learn from Joseph's life?
Integrity. Integrity.
Integrity.
Patience.
Absolutely. Patience. Boy, patience for sure, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, all those years and still didn't repay evil for evil. That's amazing.
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. That's a good one. He had every right to be angry, didn't he? I mean, every right. And you think about the two brothers that and we're going to find out next week, when they went back to Shechem and they had all the guys circumcised and they killed them. Jacob blasted them for that next week. We'll see that. You know, they were evil. And even though they were God's people, they were evil. You ever know any Christians like that? They were Christians, but they were evil?
Oh, yeah.
It's not good.
Says there were 70 in all.
70?
And if you look at what he did, you know, he just, when they first got there, he could have just said, hey guys, I'm going to go, you know, but all this trickery he did came to the point that they would not give up any. And I think that's what it was all about, was he, before he forgave them, he made sure they had changed, that they had learned something. If they had given up Benjamin and walked away, I think he would let him walk, and that would have been the end of it, and he would let him start with that.
I bet you're right. That's interesting. Did y'all hear that back there? That's interesting.
You know, and that's one of the lessons about forgiveness, that, you know, we're expected to forgive people, but we're not expected to let them walk on.
Right. We don't need to always forget, do we?
Yeah.
Even though we don't, like I say, we forget, but we learn and we don't do the same things and make the same mistakes over and over. So, it's good. Anybody else?
I think we kind of always look at how he ended up, but look how he got there. You know, I mean, he was in jail and still was this person. That always amazed me that he wasn't in any way bitter. And he was like so truthful, because when the cupbearer says to him, what's going to happen to me? I mean, he was the low man on the totem pole in that jail, that cupbearer could have been. But God puts his hand on him, because even when Potiphar's wife accuses him of raping her, that Potiphar could have had him killed, but he only threw him in jail. He didn't, or the Bible doesn't say, he didn't have him lashed. And that was a sin of the flesh, so that would have been for them. For the Egyptians, you're dead. So
even in that, he had favor.
yes, he had favor, but not, if that's what I'm trying to say is, God shows you favor, but not always with a crown on your head, not always in control, not always winning. And we have to remember that, because what I'm trying to remember now over this whole thing that's happened to me with my daughter-in-law, and it just seems like it's one thing after the other, and I keep going like this, and I think God wants me to go like that. And that's my sin in this, that I don't step out every morning and say, oh, God's in control. Because the day we found out I wasn't going blind, which is like, what more do you want? You know, we also found out that we weren't going to sell the condo, and we're like, and I was like so frustrated, and I said, okay, that's it. You know, just give it to God and say, whatever it is, it is. And we sold the condo. So, yeah, they kept wanting more. You know, our condo is 30 years old, and they want us to bring everything up to today. You know, that was not happening. And so we just kind of got sick of it. And, but I went like this. Why can't I go like this with God?
We kind of think we need to know how it's going to figure out, don't we?
Yes.
And God
You
doesn't
don't
let
always
us know.
see the favor when it's taking place.
Yes,
Right.
and we don't always know that it's favor. Your car breaks down and you could have been in a wreck. You don't always know that that was God's favor. But God doesn't always favor us. And that's one of the things that I've really learned through this. That I need to understand that I am His beloved daughter, no matter what is going on in my life.
And answer prayer is the same thing. You make me out what we want.
Right.
What we want.
Yeah.
We're going to see it.
Yeah. We may think it's supposed to go one way, and he expects to go another way, because we don't know what's going to happen down the road. Just like I said, we might have had car break down, we might have been in a wreck.
Yeah.
So,
I think they're coming over there.
yeah. It's hard to sometimes, isn't it? Anybody else? All right, well, next week we'll talk about Jacob's sons, and we'll finish up Genesis next week. So, any more?